Hey guys, and welcome to Taylor Tech. Today we are going to be taking a look at Fallout 4 and I guess my response to some of the community reactions I've seen around the game. I've seen a lot of really negative commentary on social media and other places around the web related to how Fallout 4 performs, the bugs in it, and things like that. And in some ways, I've seen that type of content overtaking actual people talking about the game and what they enjoy about it. And this is surprising to me, having played it for a while now, because it's a really fun game. It's, I think, a great iteration on the work that Bethesda has done with their other RPG games. And I think what this really comes down to is we're seeing a case where a game was overhyped, not just by the publisher, but by the player themselves. And that we're seeing some backlash amongst players who are becoming more and more prone to negative criticism when they see things about a game that they don't like. Now, it's not bad to be critical of something when it has issues. You should call those out. But it's bad to be overly negatively critical when there is good and bad. To only speak of the bad is to make something less than it is. In the same way that to only speak of the good on something when there are bad elements actually makes it better than it should be. It's important as we look at games that we take a balanced view and we understand the good and the bad that we get with something. From my perspective, Fallout 4 is a great iterative work on their Bethesda RPG model that they have for games, and that they added new elements to gameplay that significantly improved it and made it deeper and is going to make it a more long-lasting game, in my opinion. The game absolutely does have its faults. But the vast majority of these faults are things that are going to be known to players who have played any of the previous Bethesda titles going all the way back to Morrowind. So let's start with the fact that the game was overhyped. Fallout in general is an extremely iconic series. This is a game that people have been playing for their whole lives in some cases. I personally have played every single Fallout with the exception of New Vegas, because at the time I thought it was just a DLC and I kind of ignored it until a few months ago when I was reading up about Fallout 4 and realized it was a full game in and of itself. When you have an iconic series like that, people are going to become very invested in every iteration of the series. And you're more likely to have people who are going to hype themselves up about something because they love the story and they love the characters and they love the setting. When there are large amounts of hype around a game, not just from the players, but also from a publisher, people tend to expect a transformative experience. They don't expect an iterative work on previous work. They expect something new and special and different. Fallout 4, while it's a really good iterative work, even a great iterative work, is not a transformative work. And I think that's part of what's letting people down. Bethesda is to a greater degree to blame for this because they had a review embargo in place. People who received review copies of the game were not allowed to talk about it until just before release. And that to me is short-sighted on their part. It's important when you've built up hype around a game to allow a little bit of tempering before the game comes out. You want people to feel like they were taken for a ride because they got something that didn't meet their expectations when the publisher had been talking about it in a vacuum, essentially, because they were silencing all other voices with an NDA. The amount of time that Bethesda allowed before the game dropped was not really enough for new information to be absorbed or for people's opinions to be impacted. And I think that was poor on their part. I feel like a lot of the hype for this game from the player's perspective came from what they saw from Oblivion to Fallout 3. They expected, and from Oblivion to Skyrim, they expected a huge jump in the same way from Skyrim to Fallout 4. I actually think that there was a really large jump there, but I don't think it quite lived up to players' expectations. And part of this, I think, is that most players who played Skyrim for any length of time didn't play vanilla Skyrim. They modded the crap out of that game. I know I certainly did. I never finished the main game before I actually ended up just throwing a crap ton of mods on it to the point where it didn't look like the vanilla game anymore. And you know what? That's what you do with a Bethesda RPG. That's part of the experience and part of the fun for a lot of gamers, especially PC gamers. And so I think there are people who took their memories of Skyrim and their memories of modded Skyrim and based their expectations of Fallout on those, which, quite frankly, you can't really do. The amount of resources that Bethesda has to put into the game is minuscule by comparison to the resources the modding community has to make mods for the game. It doesn't even compare, and it's because of the way that mods are mass sourced from the community. Another factor that I think has affected the response to this game is that as a whole, the core gaming audience is becoming more and more skeptical and quicker to call foul on publishers or developers when they see something they don't like or when they see bugs. Some of this has to do with the gaming audience maturing and becoming more harshly critical. As a person becomes burned by something, they're more likely to feel like they are being burned, even if it's or not that great of an issue. That's they're going to make a bigger deal of it because they've been burned worse in the past. The PC gaming audience in particular is pretty bad about this, and I actually think to some degree they have good reason to act this way. They have been burned very badly in the past by horribly optimized ports, by just plain broken games that were ported from console, and by games that are developed to console specifications that are dwarfed by even budget gaming PCs. So I can understand the skepticism and the tentative nature with which people approach new games, but I think the harsh criticism is overdone to a greater degree, and that people should be willing to look at things in balance and not just look at the bad, but also look at the good. So let's talk about some of the actual faults that the game has. There are issues with the game. There are bugs, and there are plenty of them, and there are some core mechanical problems with the engine in the game. But the vast majority of these bugs are not game breaking. The vast majority of the mechanical issues with the engine are known quantities, things that have existed for a long time. They're not new with Fallout 4. You can go all the way back to Morrowind and see the exact same issues, a game that was published over a decade ago. Quite frankly, the linkage between the game's physics and scripting engines and the rendering engine has been known for this long. If you came into Fallout 4 expecting that to be different when Morrowind was that way, and Oblivion was that way, and Fallout 3 was that way, and Fallout New Vegas that was that way, and Skyrim was that way, well, I don't really know what to tell you or what you thought you were going to get. You're going to get a game where that is the case, and where unlocking frame rate is going to lead to really wonky things happening, and it's going to break the game. And when you get down to the business side of it, it doesn't really make sense for Bethesda to redevelop the engine for people who want to run the game at higher than 60 FPS. The vast majority of the gaming market is in consoles. It's not in PCs. And when you get to the PC side, the vast majority of players don't even have hardware capable of running more than 60 frames per second. Even if we go and look at the PC Master Race's hardware survey, less than 30% of the population reported having a monitor that was capable of more than 60 FPS. What this means is that a super sample of the PC gaming population that is the most likely to have a monitor capable of more than 60 FPS shows that a minority actually has that type of hardware. It's not that common of a thing. And I don't think it makes sense for Bethesda to reinvent their core game engine based on that frankly small group of the community that's impacted. The game does run fine at 60 FPS, and quite frankly, it's actually optimized fairly well in my opinion, especially when you look and you see people with 3 and 4 generation old hardware that are able to run the game at medium settings. That's unheard of for AAA titles. Quite often you need no more than 1 or 2 generation old hardware to be able to run the game at respectable settings. With my R9 280X, I'm able to run the game at ultra with everything but God rays, which are on low, and I'm doing fine. I have never noticed any frame stutter in 10, 15 hours of gameplay. That to say, it's not okay for the game's engine to have core problems like that, because they can manifest in other ways. It would be nice to see Bethesda make changes to fix that in the future, in future iterations of the Elder Scrolls series and future Fallout games. I don't know that they will, but it would be nice to see. Quite frankly, before fixing that, I would like to see them fix having to load all interior locations. I would love to have a Bethesda game where I didn't see a loading screen as often as I saw gameplay. Another new part of the game that I had a really mixed feelings towards myself was the new dialogue system. I understand they were trying to streamline it for consoles and make the dialogue options, make the dialogue process more fluid, but I feel like it loses something. Certainly there are constraints with a fully voiced player character. You can't have nearly as many dialogue responses or as deep and wide of a dialogue tree in conversations, but you tend to lose a lot when you only allow 4 choices, and when many of those choices are fixed in terms of what is going to be available. Generally speaking, up asks a question, down is yes, right is no, and left is something sarcastic. That said, I like the real-time nature of it, And I like the fact that not responding is considered a response, and that shortcutting a NPC's response is considered a response as well. I think that's actually kind of cool. All that to say, I don't know what the right dialogue system is for, what would have been the best dialogue system for Fallout 4. But suffice to say, there are elements of both Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 systems that I like. And finally, there's the control scheme in the UI, which are marks of obvious console ports when you go and you look at how they've been implemented in this game. And this, for me, was really one of the lowest points when I was looking at the game and looking at how it was done, because it's obvious that Bethesda didn't really take the time, the energy, the effort to put these to a standard that PC players are used to. There are obvious shortcuts that they took to make them fit into a console format, and that aren't necessary. It's not necessary to take those shortcuts on a PC. The first is the use of long press commands for certain actions. Now, this is something that's very common on consoles because you have a limited number of buttons on a control pad to work with. But when you have a PC with a keyboard where you have literally dozens of unbound keys that are available for use in the game, it makes no sense to do this. And the fact that they did this with things that you should never do, like combining melee and grenade into the same key, where one is a short press and one is a long press, is just the sign of shoddy work, in my opinion. Most console players even hate it when developers combine those two into the same thing, because the last thing you want to do when you're in a melee fight is throw a grenade. And so it's really frustrating to see them do that when they had so many more options on how they could have implemented that control scheme. The same thing goes when it comes to having confusing commands where similar actions are performed with different commands. I don't know what it is, but for some reason in this game, when I'm trying to exit a menu, I don't know if I'm using tab or if I'm using escape. It seems to change depending on what type of activity I'm doing. It's almost like the people who did the base building and crafting UIs were a completely different team than the people who did every other control scheme and user interface in the game. And it's extremely frustrating. More than once, I've ended up in a situation where I've had to stop and look at my keyboard and try and figure out what the hell I'm doing to get out of a menu. And that's just, it's really annoying. And it should be streamlined where the same command always performs the same function. If I'm backing out of a menu, it should be the same button, whether it is a dialogue menu or a companion menu or an inventory menu or a crafting menu or a building menu. These issues are currently things that can't be undone with the default key binding setups available. Again, that's a final nail in the coffin of a shoddy port to PC. It should be very simple to allow a PC player to rebind every command to a different key if they want to. Instead, we have to rebind the melee/grenade key to a different key. We can't separate them out and have melee be one key and grenade be another key. I have to say that is one of the mods that I'm looking forward to the most. So modding community, please make that mod so that we can stop throwing grenades at our feet. So what Fallout 4 does is that I feel like makes it a great iterative experience on the previous Bethesda RPG games is that it added a lot to the experience. There are new systems like crafting, base building, and customizable power armor that are going to add a lot of depth to gameplay, or it's going to open up a lot of player choice, and it's going to create for a longer lasting gameplay experience. There's a lot more content to experience, and there's a lot more player-driven content to experience, which I think is really cool. They also did a great job improving the combat system. Melee and gunplay are both much more engaging than they used to be, and especially the gunplay. I am tickled with the way the gunplay works in Fallout 4. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. It plays like any modern shooter in a lot of senses, and that's really cool. I'm high marks to Bethesda for improving that. And looking forward, modders are going to have an absolute heyday with these new systems. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have the ability to customize and modify these systems in ways that weren't experienceable in previous games. And it's really important to remember what mass sourcing is going to do for this game when it comes to the modding community. We're going to see more depth into the crafting and the base building and the power armor systems, and it's going to be great. I'm really excited to see what players are going to come up with. So the bottom line for me is that I think that Fallout 4 is a great game. It's a great iterative work, and it's going to be an awesome game going forward. So yes, there are things that are not good about it. Sure, it's still using the same core engine that they've been using for 13 years now, and there are some flaws with that engine, but those are known quantities to most players, and most players know how to work around those issues. That doesn't mean that I don't think they should improve on it or they shouldn't fix it. I also think that modding is going to be absolutely spectacular for this game, and that modders are going to have an awesome time building out and exploring all the possibilities with the new systems that have been added. All right, guys, so those are my thoughts on Fallout 4. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, throw a like on it. If you didn't, or if you've got more complicated feelings, then leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know what you thought. If you're new to this channel, click the subscribe button for more content like this in the future. There's links in the description section below to places you can find me online, like Twitter, Reddit, and Steam. I'd love for you to come follow and interact with me. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.